Well, welcome everyone. My name is Maribel Ojeda, and I am the Director of Professional Development at ProLiteracy. And we have a really great session for you today with our presenter, Stephen Reid. I'd like to welcome you all. This is the second low-level English language learning webinar of the Teacher Training Plus series. As many of you are doing already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and your program or where you're working. And feel free to continue to chat as we get started. Okay. Before we turn it over to the presenters, I just have a couple of housekeeping things. As you see on the screen, if you have a question, please raise your hand, use the raise your hand button, and we will be sure to answer. Next slide. All right, so as you know, we're here for starting from scratch, working with low-level ELL students with little to no first language literacy. And our presenter today is Stephen Reid. Go ahead. The Zoom controls. So basically, you have the Zoom controls right on the screen. You're going to use the chat only to introduce yourself or share links and resources with the group and to ask questions of the group. To communicate with our presenter, we want you to use the Q&A feature. That's to ask content questions, and my colleague Danielle will make sure your questions are answered there. And the presenter will stay a few minutes after if you have any unanswered questions. Okay, next slide.
Stephen, next slide, please.
Thank you. We are recording. This presentation will be sent to you in a follow-up email. So along with that, you'll receive a copy of the slides as well as the summary sheet, a chat transcript, and your certificate of attendance. We'll also send you information about our scholarship and membership offers through this project. So look for that email in about 2 days. You will get a separate email with registration links for Stephen's coaching sessions. We encourage you to attend those coaching sessions as an opportunity to dig deeper. If you have questions specific to your practice that you want to talk about, or you want to network with some additional folks around the topics that Stephen brings up today, it is incredibly exciting that we have the opportunity to have these coaching sessions. You may already know that, but we offer those follow-up coaching sessions about 1 to 3 weeks following the webinar. And the sessions are designed to build off what you already learned here today with Stephen. It's not a repeat of this webinar. So keep that in mind. This is a chance for you to meet in a smaller group on the topics that, that you want to discuss around this session. And then next slide. Some additional resources. As you know, as part of the Teacher Training Plus project, we offer a scholarship and free membership. The scholarship is for approximately $900 in materials through New Readers Press, and it's limited to first come, first serve. We had a really successful turnout during our first round of webinars in September, but there are still scholarships available. The membership offer is for 1 free year. We'll put those links in the chat box. Oh, thank you, Danielle. And if there are no further questions about those topics, I'm going to hand over the call to Stephen. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody, and really excited to have you all here for this webinar. I was just telling Danielle and Maribel earlier that this is an area that I kind of accidentally uh, became involved in whenever I started working in Charlottesville. We have a large number of students who come to us with little to no literacy in their first language. And it was not a group that I had really been working with that much earlier in my career. But when I got here, it was a shift to working with students like this. And so it became really important for me to learn as much as I could about working with a population of folks who don't have literacy in that first language. And so that's how I've developed this presentation, because we have, I do what I can to make sure that my volunteers are as supported as possible in while they're working with their students. And so it's really important for me to make sure that I know everything I can in order to answer many of their questions as possible. So today we're going to be looking at working with and kind of describing some of the causes of pre-literacy or non-literacy among adult learners. How did they get to be adults and not have access to literacy? And then we're going to look at some strategies for working with those learners, and then some activities that you can use in your lessons. Now, I do want to say, I'm going to preface this by saying the first little bit of today's presentation is going to feel a bit academic. And so if you are a volunteer tutor and you're not and you haven't done a lot of the research, some of this could be very helpful for you just to kind of give you some background information. But don't let it make you think, oh no, I'm not going to understand anything that happens in this entire presentation. That's not true. It's just going to be that I've kind of front loaded that. And so all of the strategies and activities are a little bit later in the presentation. Also, I'm probably going to zip through some of that early stuff a little on the fast side. And so just if you have specific questions on some of those things, save them for the Q&A or jump into a coaching session, and I will be glad to talk to you in depth about some of those topics. Okay. So let's start by looking at what makes, what causes someone to not have literacy as they're growing up. What's going on there? Why are we not having access to literacy? So according to our world in data, about 14% of the world's population is either functionally or completely illiterate. And that means there's roughly 1 billion people who cannot read and write well. And you can see in the map, the darker colors are the most literate, and the lighter colors are the least literate countries. And so if you look at a country like Afghanistan, only about 38% of the adults over the age of 15 actually are literate in their first language. And so we have a huge chunk of the population who has little to no literacy. But in general, if you look right in the middle of the world, that's where most of the people are who aren't literate in their primary language. When our students get to us, they really kind of fit into 6 different categories as far as their prior education is concerned. These categories are not connected to how much English they have. It's looking at what their level of literacy is in their first language. The first category are folks who are pre-literate, either because their first language doesn't have a written form or is only in the process of developing a written form. There's about 6,800 languages in the world. 51% of the people in the world speak the top 11 languages. 44% speak the next 200 languages. So that's like 95% of the population, and they are speaking about 5% of the world languages. So there's still a tremendous number of languages out there that are spoken by only a very small population. There are still about 4,000 languages that either do not have a written form or are in the process of developing one. And if you look at those languages, a lot of times they're going to be in that little rectangle that I showed you in the previous picture, that it's right across the middle of the world. Probably the most common that I have been running into lately are the non-literate people who do not have literacy access because of war or famine or economic reasons, things like that. So they've never been allowed to attend school, and so they have almost no education in that first language. And those are followed by the semi-literate, those who've had a few years of formal education. I think particularly I see a lot of students like this out of Latin America who have attended 3 or 4 years of school, and they have just because of the remote nature of where they were living, they did not have easy access to much education, and so that's one of the categories that we see a lot of our students from. You'll also sometimes see these students referred to as SLIFE, which is students with limited or interrupted formal education. And this is a fairly substantial population among adult education across the U.S. The next step is those who are literate in a first language and have sometimes a great deal of literacy and education within that first language, but their script does not use an alphabetic system. So something like the logographies of Mandarin Chinese, the kanji in Japanese, syllabaries like Japanese kana, Korean, or Cherokee, where they have some form of writing, but that writing does not line up with an alphabet that such as what we use. And then the next step up from there is are folks who have literacy in an alphabetic language, either like the Abugidas, Burmese, Thai, Tamil, or the Abjads of Arabic, the alphabets of like Cyrillic. For those who are not familiar with those terms, an Abugida is a writing system where the vowel and consonant are written as a single unit, and they have like a single symbol to represent the entire syllable. An abjad, like what you see with the Arabic alphabet, it is a writing system of consonants only. They have very few vowels, and they are either inferred by the reader or they're represented by diacritical marks. And so we do often see a lot of students who come to us who have high levels of literacy, but just not in with a Latin alphabet. And so here we see what an Abugida looks like. And this script is very common for Sanskrit, Nepali, and other languages in the Indian subcontinent. And then you may be already familiar with the Greek alphabet. So it's a writing system that is very similar to what we use. It's not the exact Latin alphabet. And then we have those students who come to us who are very literate in their first language, and they do use the Latin alphabet for their writing system. They may have some extra symbols that we don't have. For example, a C with a caron in the Slavic languages, which would give them a ch sound, or the C with the cedilla, which will give it a soft S sound that you see in French and Portuguese. So they have some other symbols that we may not have, but for the most part, the alphabet's the same. And so if we're looking at this 6 levels, what I'm going to be talking about today really just centers on those first 3. Those who come to us with literacy in their first language, even if they don't speak much English, we will find that their progress will be much, much quicker. And so what my focus will be today is looking at these first 3 levels, those who are preliterate, non-literate, or semi-literate. So what causes someone to be not literate in their first language? The first thing is always going to be political reasons. Whenever we're looking at situations with war, genocide, famine, forced migrations, that's going to cause big interruptions in education, and so that's going to limit somebody's ability. Poverty is another key feature to folks with lower levels of literacy. Even in the United States, about 18% of the U.S. population has low literacy, or 18% of the people who have English as a first language have low literacy. But according to the National Institute for Literacy, 70% of welfare recipients in the U.S. fit into that category. So while it's 18% of the population as a whole, 70% of the welfare recipients fit into that low literacy. About 82% of children who qualify for free or reduced lunches are reading below grade level by the time they get to 4th grade. And so there is a direct connection between poverty and literacy all over the world, and even here in the US. And then there are certain cultures where education is not possible, particularly whenever we look at some cultures where women are not allowed to go to school. For example, in South Sudan, about 75% of girls never even start primary school. In Afghanistan, with the return of the Taliban, women and girls are not allowed to go to school. In Ethiopia, about 40% of girls are married by the time they are 18. And in Burkina Faso, only about 1% of girls complete secondary education. There are also ethnic populations who are either limited or completely prohibited from attending school. And if you look at the Uyghurs in China, the Kurds in Iran and other countries, the Roma population throughout Europe, there are some oppression there that are preventing them from attaining any form of education. So let's think about what we need to do in order to help people who are coming to us at this level and are just getting started working with a writing system. And so I think it's important for us to kind of break it down to the smallest units to start with, and be thinking about these as we are preparing our lessons and working with our students. And one of the helpful things is to break down every word into its phonemes, which are the smallest unit of sound. For example, dog has 3 phonemes, the duh, the aw, and the guh. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using the American Heritage Dictionary system of writing. You'll also see a lot of things that have the International Phonetic Alphabet symbol, but I think most people are more familiar with the American Heritage, and that's why I tend to use that. I also will write phonemes between slashes. In American English, there are about 48 phonemes, and that it's going to depend on who you ask. I've seen numbers as low as 40. I've seen numbers as high as 50. But a lot of linguists decided that 48 is the right number. But if you look at their lists, their 48 don't necessarily line up. And so you may not have the matching 48 from one list to the next, but they both agree that there's 48. So I'm going to just say that there's roughly 48. I will, in the handouts, you will get copies of the phonemes that we have in English. I have those already available for you. And at the end, whenever you get the email with the handouts, that's going to be included in there. So you'll have that. And then looking at graphemes. Graphemes are the smallest unit of writing. So a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. A grapheme is the smallest unit of writing. Again, with dog, we have 3, D-O-G. And graphemes I will put in quotation marks. That's how you'll be able to tell if I'm talking about the letter or the sound. The sound is going to be in slashes, and the letters are going to be in quotation marks. So I think it's important for us to be thinking when we're working with our students and helping them develop a level of writing, that we look at that relationship between phonemes and graphemes. So when we hear the sound duh, we write the letter D, or reversing that, when we see the letter D, we say the sound duh. And so we have that connection. And that's part of that alphabetic principle of understanding that there is a connection between sounds and letters. And phonological recoding is that process of taking those sounds that we're hearing and translating them into a printed symbol and creating a word out of that and being able to spell that word correctly. And that last part is the tricky part, because as any of you who have taught for any length of time, you've had the question, why is English spelling so complicated? And it truly is. Of those 48 phonemes we have, there are approximately 250 letter combinations that will make those. And so it makes our spelling system really complicated and very frustrating for a lot of our students. If we look at just the phoneme J, if we hear J, obviously we're going to start with just writing letter J, right? Like in jog, it's J. That's easy, right? Well, it's also G as in giant, and it's DGE as in bridge, and it's GE as in cage, and it's D as in gradual. So just that sound J can be written in 5 different ways. And so that's something that we have to think about and keep in mind as we're working with our students, that our spelling is very complex. And so it can be a level of frustration for our students. So you'll have to be patient with them there, because we have not made it easy for them. But as we're getting started working with these preliterate students, we have to be thinking about an understanding of print awareness. And that is being able to recognize the role and function of what's happening in print. And sometimes that can go all the way down to being comfortable holding a pen or a pencil. I've worked with beginning literacy level students who have never really been in a classroom, and so they don't know how to hold a pencil properly. And so you may want to work with your students, checking how they're holding their pencils to see if they can fix that grip a little bit to make it a little easier for them to write. Also, understanding and recognizing the letters and numbers in the Latin alphabet, recognizing that these are actually letters and these other symbols may not be. And then the next step after that is being able to recognize high frequency sight words. And once we can get to that point, we're really on our way to making a lot of progress and helping the students on that path to literacy. as a teacher, you may need to teach things like the direction of the language. Our writing system moves from left to right, but there are other languages that move right to left. Arabic, Dari, Pashto, Urdu, these all move the other direction. There are even some that move top to bottom. Traditional Chinese, traditional Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, they can be written vertically. Most currently have swapped over to a horizontal style now, but the traditional style was always top to bottom. Also, if you have worked with a lot of people who come out of the using the Arabic writing system, you'll notice that they write in the middle of the line, that you will see them as they are writing anything, the middle of the letter is hitting right on the line. And that's because that is how the Arabic writing system works. And so you may need to help guide them to where it moves up to the proper location on the line. You may want to use paper the same way that the same style of paper that I used when I was learning to write. I am going to throw in a caveat on this one, because I have found that with in a large group setting, sometimes this paper can be very confusing. If it's like one teacher and 20, 25 students, this can be a little, it can confuse the students and make it even harder. But I found it very successful for those who are working like one-on-one with their students, and they can kind of give them that individualized attention. Makes it a little bit easier. So that's something you want to be thinking about as you are working with lined paper like this. Just be aware that the paper might be confusing to some people. Okay. This is one of those topics that I get pushback from sometimes, and there's a bit of controversy attached to this. I do not think it's a good idea to jump in to the alphabet and start with A and go to Z, and that's what we're going to do in lesson 1 is learn the entire alphabet. I think that is overwhelming, and so not necessarily a great idea. So if I were going to be teaching you to read and write in Arabic, and I just handed you this chart and said, okay, we're going to start with this, and in addition to this, this is what the letter looks like when it's on its own, and then I'm going to, there's a different way to write it if it's the beginning of the word, and a third way to write it if it's in the middle of the word, and there's a fourth way to write it if it's at the end of the word. So that's not going to be a problem for you at all, right? We can learn all of that today. Similar to the Abugida Burmese, if I handed you that and we're like, okay, today we're going to learn this alphabet, we're good, right? Not a problem. I'm thinking many of you be like, that's going to take more than one lesson. So, and if you think about that and jump that to this, there's 26 symbols there. There's a lot going on that can be confusing. And then I throw those at you, and we've got a whole bunch more. Some were just smaller versions of the bigger one, but some of them are completely new symbols. That's a lot to try to get someone to do right from the beginning. For somebody who doesn't understand writing at all, that's a lot to expect. Think about if I handed you this and I said, how many letters do we have right now? Feel free to jump in the chat and tell me how many letters you see right there. Already starting to see 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 10, 8, 6, 7. Well, let me tell you, there are four. Okay. We start with this one, which is bay, ye, yay, I'm sorry, bay, yay, shin, and te at the end. And that is the word 20, bisht, in Dari. And so, you may be looking at that and think, that is a wavy line and some dots. How do you expect me to learn that that is actually a word in some other language? It's just a wavy line and some dots. How am I supposed to make something of that? Well, let's think about this. What I have here is a circle and a line, right? It's just a circle and a line. But if I put it this way, we have a P, or a B, or a D, or if I put a little tail on it, it's a G, and if I move the little tail, it's Q. But to our students who are brand new with the language, it's a circle and a line. You move the line around a little bit. Sometimes you add a tail, but it's a circle and a line. And so while we looked at bisht and saw a wavy line and some dots, for some of our beginning students, they're looking at a circle and a line, and they're not seeing that this is 6 different letters. So something for us to be thinking about. And so, also looking at this, what letter do I have here? I realize you can't all yell it out at me, or you can, but I'm not hearing it. So we have a G, right? How about this one? Those two don't look very much alike, do they? And how about here? And here? And this one? How about that one? What about that one? And here we go again. So all of those are G's, different fonts giving us very different images. We're all comfortable with the Latin alphabet, so we look at all those and go, yep, those are G's. But for some of our students, that could be very complex. They may not be able to realize that all 8 of those symbols are the same letter. And so again, jumping into the alphabet and starting with A and going to Z can be very, very overwhelming. So that's why I don't recommend it. So that's why I say we start with the words that matter. Work with your student's name. Make sure that they can write their name, their spouse's names, their children's names, their addresses. So things that are important. So like for me, I would start with these 3 words. That would be my name and my cat's names. So you got to start with the words that are going to mean something and that are going to stick in my head. And so I would choose the words that are going to be most useful. Then as you are building on the words that they are able to write because they are more comfortable with writing in general, once they have that, then they can you can go back and kind of fill in the blanks on the letters that they don't have yet, or they've only briefly seen. So using that as kind of developing the alphabet with them, but starting with the letters that are important to them and then growing from there. As you are building up their new language, you're going to start thinking about adding in vocabulary, both in spoken form and in written form. And so let's look at some ways to build that vocabulary. Obviously, repetition is going to be the key to learning new vocabulary. Research shows that it takes to hear and pronounce a new word a minimum of 12 times before it starts locking into the learner's long-term memory. And I don't mean just saying the word 12 times in a row and you're good, you're set. I mean 12 exposures to it. So within a class, hitting it a few times, talking about it in one shot, and then hour later doing it again, and then at the end of the lesson seeing it in the wrap up of your lesson, and then in the warm up of the next lesson, and hitting it several times that way over the course of a couple of weeks, at least 12 times is going to be what it takes for a lot of our students to lock it in. There are some people who can, in general comprehension and recognition, will get there a little bit quicker. So it's the difference between when you hear a word and understanding what it means versus being able to use the word easily in your speech. So it takes a little more effort to get it to that point where you're comfortable using it all the time and it just naturally flows, as opposed to just being able to recognize it when you see it. Children and some literate adults can do this in as few as 5. Children's brains are just little sponges, and they can pick up new vocabulary much, much quicker. But in general, you need to be thinking, aiming for at least 12 times in order to get new vocabulary locked into place. Our vocabulary really can be kind of divided into 2 different categories. We have content vocabulary versus function vocabulary. Content vocabulary is the words that carry a very descriptive meaning. Things like nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs that have a very tight definition and they are describing an object or an action. As opposed to a function word, which is going to be some part of speech that has a grammatical task within the sentence. There's something about it showing relationships to other objects either in that sentence or in other sentences, or has some sort of function that it is doing within that sentence. So things like determiners, which is this, that, these, those, conjunctions, a and the, prepositions, on, over, up, down, pronouns, auxiliary verbs, qualifiers, and question words all fit into those categories of function words. And function words are a bit tougher to teach. And so we're going to look a little bit at what we need to do to make sure we get those. And so if we look at this quote from Nelson Mandela, the words here in red are our content words, and then the ones in blue are our function words. So in this sentence, 43% are content words, 57% are function words. The linguist James Pennebaker said that function words make up about 1% of our total vocabulary, but 60% of the words that we use. And so in this quote from Mandela, it shows that that's exactly true. It's about 60% of the words are function words as opposed to the content. If you look at the top 100 words, 100 most frequently used words in English, you'll see that only 21 of the 100 are content words. And it's not until we get to word number 30, which is word, that we actually see our first content word in the list. So a lot more of the most commonly used words are function words. If you would like to dig a little deeper into the function words, these are the various types. And I'm not going to go too deeply into this during my presentation today, but I'd be happy to talk more about these as we go into coaching sessions. And so if you have some specific questions on working with the function words, then we'll look at those, the individual pieces, a little more in depth in the coaching sessions. But when you're working with function words, translations are not going to help you because not all the languages use them in the same way. For example, there are lots of languages that do not use articles at all. The is the most commonly used word in the English language. And if you are working with somebody who's coming out of a Slavic language or some South Asian languages, they don't have a version of the. And so it's a completely new concept to them. Prepositions are not even are not even unified across American English. We have variations of which preposition we would use even within American English. So, think about the fact, do you fill out a form or do you fill in a form? And the answer to that question is likely based on where you grew up in the United States, because certain parts of the country will say they fill in a form, and other places say they will fill out a form. And the variations between American English and British English, I do things on the weekend, and British English will do things at the weekend. And so even within English, there are variations. And so from one language to the next, it becomes quite challenging. And so translations are not going to help you. The way I think is probably the best approach, starting with pronouns. Pronouns can be easier to learn because most languages do use pronouns of some sort, and so they are the easiest to identify. But one thing that I will point out for those of you who are working with Dari or with Dari speakers or Farsi speakers, they have a pronoun u that is both he and she. And so and that's not the only language that does it, that they do not have a gendered pronoun in that situation. So it fits for both males or females. So u is kind of any person. And so you have to be careful with that. If you notice that your student is sometimes struggling with the difference between he or she, or everyone is a he or everyone is a she, you may want to look back at that and spend some time talking about those pronouns and how we do gender ours. And then spend some time looking at relationships between things, and the difference between and but, this and this, or this or that. And so having that idea of that relationship between can be really important. Look at that and focus on the function in the sentence. How is it being used? What is it doing? And that's what's going to help you get your student to understand how the word is being used, and then they'll be able to start using it a little more quickly and easily on their own. These can get overwhelming, and so if you spend an entire lesson just hammering away at conjunctions, your students could get overwhelmed fairly quickly. So I wouldn't do a lot at one time, but I would do a little bit all the time. And so visiting frequently is important, but you don't want to overload it. The easiest words to learn in a new language are concrete nouns. The brain is really good at mapping a word to an object. And so if we are in that situation where we are working with just those concrete nouns, then we can just see a picture and map it to that new word. And that's the easiest way to learn new vocabulary, is using an object and mapping to that object. Abstract nouns are a little tougher, and those usually are going to come a little bit later in the learning process. Things like love and joy and knowledge. Those are a little harder to map, so you may want to hold off on those a little bit. Action verbs usually come next. It tends to be easier for us to learn verbs, particularly if it is a longer action. We can kind of map those a little bit quicker than if the action is very short. And so walking or running or laughing or singing, those are all longer actions, and so those words we tend to pick up a little bit quicker, and they tend to lock into our brains a little quicker. Stated verbs are a bit tougher, and the problem with that is one of those state verbs you need to teach pretty much right away. The state verbs, if that's a new term for you, are things like and need and want and have, and the one we use all the time, be. And be tends to be one of those verbs that we teach very quickly in the process because we use it so much. And so that's one of those that you're going to want to spend a little bit of time making sure that they understand. Oftentimes, it's one of those that when working with somebody at a very, very low level, we will just teach it as this is how this sentence is created, and we'll dig into the intricacies of how do we and what exactly it's doing as we move later into the process. And so we start by, my name is Stephen, and we just throw that is in there, and we don't really explain what the is. At that point, it's just this is how we create that sentence. And then as the student's ability level starts growing, then we can go back and spend a little more time kind of examining what be is. Adjectives tend to take a little bit longer than verbs, but there are some that we can kind of map pretty quickly. This tends to work best if we're looking at it as, in a combination. So if we're looking at a comparison between fast and slow or tall and short, that by seeing the difference, our brains will often be able to make that connection a little bit quicker. Colors also are the adjectives that we pick up very, very quickly. I am a big believer in using pictures whenever I'm teaching new vocabulary, but there are some things that we need to be thinking about in there. We have the ability to look at all four of these objects and connect that to the word chair. And even though these four chairs are pretty different, our brain will still, if we are being taught the word chair, our brains will go, okay, that's a chair, we get it. And we have that mutual exclusivity that we're able to lock in the word to the variety of objects. Whenever I am choosing something like this and I'm showing these pictures, I tend to like to use three different things that the only thing they have in common is the word I'm trying to teach. So if I hold up a ballpoint pen, a felt tip pen, and an older style fountain pen, and I look at all three of those, holding up three of them, or I've got a ballpoint that is white and a ballpoint that is black and a ballpoint that is blue, and looking at the outside, the only thing that they have in common is that they're pens. And so if I'm teaching you that word, you're not going to go to the color of the object. You're not going to go to the style of the object. You're going to get to the obvious trait that they have in common, which is pen. In general, I feel like photographs are a little bit better than drawings when learning new vocabulary. Drawings can be very helpful because it will give you, sometimes they can be a little more precise to get you to exactly the type of thing that you're trying to point to. But in general, I like photographs better. The brain tends to use a photograph to to map the word a little bit more solidly than a drawing does. Also, there are going to be certain cultures where drawing's not really as much of a thing, and so they may not necessarily understand what a smiley face is or a frowny face, but if they see somebody smiling or frowning, they'll get it a little bit quicker. And so I do like photographs a little bit better than drawings. Pantomime and charades. Charades is going to be your new best friend, particularly when you're teaching verbs, because getting up and doing it is going to lock it into your brain and your student's brain a lot faster. So definitely be thinking about that. Using animations and videos can be great. When I was learning prepositions as a kid, I was taught a preposition was anything a dot could do to a box. And so as it's moving around, it can be over, under, beside, or between. So, using animations can be very helpful for you. So let's think about some activities that you can use in your lessons. In my last webinar, I spent some time talking about what do we do in that first lesson, the very first lesson. So I do recommend going back and picking that one up if you haven't seen it already. But for the things that I like to do very early on, teaching things like yes, no, I do not understand, can you repeat that, can you slow down, what is this object called? Teaching those phrases from the very beginning is going to be very helpful for you. Using some form of comprehension check, like these little cards, which in the handouts you'll be able to get a printable copy of these that will help your student say, I'm feeling good with this, I'm feeling okay with this, I'm feeling not so great about it. One of the nice things is street lights are universal in color, and so everywhere in the world, green means go, red means stop, yellow means caution, slow down, and so that is going to help you in this case because they may not necessarily understand the smiley faces, but they will certainly understand the color. Using a disambiguous method of learning new vocabulary. So in this case, let's say that we've been working on learning fruits, and last week I taught you the words pear and plum and lemon, and they already know those three. So if I asked you, what is the pineapple? You'll very likely be able to point to the pineapple because it's not the other three, so it has to be the extra one, the new picture. That's going to be a good way for you to be able to see, okay, this is the one that they're probably talking about. So they will assign that new word to the new object. I think use of realia is very important. Particularly whenever you're using things like maps, use the map for your town, use the bus routes for your town, the ones that they are going to be seeing and is useful right away. Using things whenever you're checking for identity of words and letters, seeing having your student identify, circle which two in each of those lists are exactly the same. In the second set, circle the one that is different. And so being able to identify, looking at which letters you've been working on will help them be able to identify which one's going to be most important, or which ones are the same, which ones are different, and fit the category that you're trying to get to. Again, circling the correct word, limiting those choices to just a couple is going to be very helpful for you. You don't want to overwhelm them too early. Close activities where you're just missing a single letter. And then at the beginning, you give them some letter options and they can pick the one that's correct. And then as they get a little more advanced, you can pull out that and they would just have to remember the letter on their own. as we are doing other comprehension checks. Open-ended comprehension checks can be too complex, so be very careful about using open-ended questions with lower level students. If I just ask, where is she? It requires a lot more vocabulary from the student. But if I ask just yes, no questions, is she at the store? Is she at the bank? Is she at the post office? They would be able to answer that as a yes or no. Depending on the level of the student, they would be able to, they may be able to answer with just a nod of the head or a shake of the head. And then as they get a little better, they would get to being able to say yes or no. And then a more advanced level student would be able to say, yes, she is. Yes, she is at the store. No, she is not at the bank. She's at the store. So as their ability level gets higher, they will be able to make more complex sentences as responses. But just giving them that yes, no, or in this case, either or option can be very helpful. So is she at the bank or at the pharmacy? Is he on the bus or on a plane? And so by limiting it to just those two choices, it helps your student get to that point a little more easily. And then all of that would lead to a picture-based experience story. And we had a tutor recently who tried this one out and asked the student to take pictures of themselves doing a task. In this case, they were making dinner. And she took pictures every step of the way, and then the student printed them all out, and then they worked together to write a little bit of a caption for each of the pictures. And so they spent some time editing them together, and then they took all of that and they stapled it together and created a little book. And the student didn't realize it at the beginning what they were doing, but by the time they were done and it was all stapled together, like, wait a minute, I wrote a book. And it's just pictures that they took while making dinner and then writing the captions for themselves. So that's a nice little activity that you can do as your students start advancing and get a little higher. Hey, and so that's going to kind of wrap up the presentation. I'm seeing some things in the Q&A. I am going to stick around. I know we're probably getting a little close to the top of the hour on this. So I would ask that if you can hit that QR code and jump into the survey sometime today, I would really, really appreciate that. You'll also get a link to the survey later. And I know that whenever Danielle sends out all the follow-up material, she'll send out that link to the survey as well. And I'm one of those people who I go through and I read all of the surveys, responses, because I want to know what I can do to get better. And so that next time I'm presenting, which is in, let me go back to sharing my screen. The next time I'm presenting is on April 9th. And so I'm hoping to see you guys back here for starting to read, building phonemic awareness and foundation literacy skills with pre-literate learners. And then also in this slide, it has all the upcoming webinars for everybody else in the Teacher Training Plus series. You'll see this slide whenever you get that copy of the slides from Danielle. Okay, Q&A time.
Yep, we have a few questions. Unfortunately, some of these individuals had to leave, but they can catch it on the recording, your answers. So we will continue on. So Sue said, big problem is getting beginners back to class. I love many fun activities that require coming back to class.
Part of that is going to be that the student feels overwhelmed in class, and so when you get them the first few lessons, it needs to be a fun and happy experience for them. And so I think it's a good idea for you to do whatever you can in those first couple of lessons to really kind of build a community as quickly as possible. and do what you can to develop that sense of we're here together to help everybody. And by doing that in the first couple of classes, the students are going to start getting locked in and go, okay, this is where I want to be. This is where it's fun to be. And so doing some activities that will help them kind of feel comfortable immediately. That's another reason why jumping into the alphabet isn't my first choice, because it gets so overwhelming, and you don't want your students to feel overwhelmed on their second lesson. So doing fun activities that, and particularly if it's a fun activity that at the end they have something, they've created a little placard with their name that they're going to use in class, and they come in and pick that up and put it in front of them as they are sitting down each lesson. Something like that can be a great exercise, so that they have something they've done and created, and feel as part of the group.
Great. So Kate had asked which font to use with students. So that was back when you were talking about the different G's.
So I would tend to go with something like Arial, something sans serif, because it is a little bit easier to read. This pains me to say. A case can be made for Comic Sans because it can be, it can look like writing and is very basic in its structure. Personally, I'm not a fan of Comic Sans. I think it is possibly one of the worst fonts ever created. My boss here has told me that using Comic Sans is a fireable offense, and I'm on the same page with her on that. But something very, very basic. I see a vote for Century Gothic, which is also a good choice. So just a very foundation font that's sans serif is probably the best way to go.
Great. Okay. How useful is it to teach the names of those terms versus how they are used?
Oh, never teach those names until they're a level 5 student. Yeah, because if you look at those, if you took those names, translated them into their language, and said it's a this, they're like, they don't know what that word means in their language either. And so it's not useful at all. So I would not teach the word preposition, adjective, adverb, conjunction until the students, getting ready to start working on their GED or something like that. No.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you encourage students to learn reading and writing in their first language before they start English literacy?
I have zero ability to teach somebody how to read and write in Dari or Nepali, and so I would not be able to help them in that, but I can help them as they are working on it in English. So pick up your English, because you're here together in that room, and so spend that time working on your English together. And then, if they're going to be living here for the rest of their lives, it may not be of any use to them to learn how to read and write Burmese. And so I would think that, so no, I would not put a lot of effort into trying to get them to learn it in their language too.
Okay, so in regards to the chair example you showed, is being able to tell the similarity in different ones an English-speaking thing or a human thing?
It's a human thing. But it's not something that, like if we're looking at that, the mutual aspect of it, if we're looking at those 4 different chairs and being able to say this is a chair, and that is something that would be universal across languages. So no matter which language they're coming in from or going out to, that's something they'll be able to get that, regardless of what their experience in language is. So that's a human
Right.
thing.
Could you please mention some ideas for online pre-beginner games, animations, etc.?
So like the animations I created off of PowerPoint because they're so very, very basic. I don't have any off the top of my head, but it's something I could start seeing if I can find any, and then maybe in the coaching session I might be able to give some help there. But like off the top of my head, I don't have any.
Okay. Could you explain how much oral English the student needs first to succeed in English print literacy instruction?
There's something to be said for just jumping in and trying to work both at the same time when you're working in that with those absolute true beginners. I don't think they need to have tons and tons of spoken English before I'm getting them to write their name or write their address. And so I think that you can do a lot of those things kind of simultaneously. Now, obviously, I'm going to be just looking at the absolute basics as far as writing is concerned when we're first getting started. But, I'm looking at having them write single words and then eventually to phrases and then, growing to a point where they can write a sentence. But yeah, I think that your students are going to learn a lot more spoken language first, and then the others will come along as we go. But yeah. So I try to work both in together. I see in the chat, is there a cost for the coaching session? No, there's not.
Coaching sessions are free and a wonderful opportunity to really explore with Stephen. I encourage anybody to sign up.
Yes, me too. Because they're fun.
They are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Claudia asks, if I can speak the student's native language, how do you feel about saying something in their language if they are completely lost as to what I want them to do? If they seem very confused, or should I always speak in English no matter what?
So that question is going to depend on the level of the students. So if they are like an absolute novice, they don't know 10 words in English, being able to jump back and forth into their language can be very helpful for them. But as they start progressing, it's going to slow things down. And so at first, jumping in when it's absolutely necessary is fine, but try to stick to English as much as possible. But once you get up to, like, the student is like a level 2, no, you're hurting them by jumping into their language. It needs to be English only at that point. Okay.
All right. Let's see. Have you done this remotely rather than or in addition to face-to-face?
Pretty much everything that I've done has been that everything that's in here has been done both face-to-face and remotely.
Okay. How do you emphasize to volunteer instructors to teach students this way? It's hard to tell volunteers what to do. Accurate.
I sure give it a try, though. I'm not above telling volunteers the best way to do things because I work with lots of volunteers too. And so I think that it is important to be upfront and say, listen, these are the techniques that I am very confident with. And so I think you should really be working on these things. And what I find is that, there are going to be some volunteers who are like, no, I'm going to do it however I want to do it. And, that is what it is. But for the most part, what I find is the volunteers are looking for that help. And whenever you say, hey, I think you should try it this way, most are likely to jump on and try it that way.
Okay. Do you recommend materials such as Barton or other Orton-Gillingham learning materials?
I am unfamiliar with those, so I do not have an opinion. Sorry.
How much time would you spend on phonemic awareness activities with this type of learner?
So I would, it's one of those that you just kind of pull it in as it's useful. As you are working on learning to write a new word, thinking about, okay, let's look at all of these sounds. If I'm learning to write my name, sa, ta, e, va, e, n. And so, you know, working through the phonics of how that's going to connect the sound to the letter and the letter to the sound and putting that together. I would spend a little bit of time doing that, yeah.
Okay. Let's see, I lost my place. How do you feel about using Google Translate for complicated ideas like thought or joy? It saves a ton of time.
Just in general, I think that the translators can be useful, just like the question I answered earlier about being able to jump into their language if you have it. Then yeah, I think it's sometimes it can be useful. The problem with Google Translate is if they have, there are some languages where you can push a button and it'll say the word out loud, and that's great. There are some languages that you can't. It doesn't have that function. So if I translate it into Farsi, for example, and I'm trying to get them to read it, if they don't read Farsi, then that's useless because they can't read it from there either. So use it some if it helps, but again, as you're moving to a higher level student, with absolute beginners, absolutely use that Google Translate. Level ones, sure. Level twos, start transitioning away. Level threes and up, nope, no translators. They need to use an English only dictionary.
Okay. Should I require my students to speak only in English class? I think you kind of covered that already.
As much as you can.
Okay. Oh, gosh. I'm sorry. They just keep coming in.
I'm fine.
Okay. Oh no, I'll take care of that one. So pre-beginners introductory could use their native language to translate to English in limited amounts. Again, that's just,
yeah.
Yes. Okay. And the only other one I see is, well, what do you think about Laubach way to reading? Do you have any experience with that, Stephen?
I find that, okay, I'm going to have to be as judicial as I can on this because this is pro-literacy and Laubach is a New Readers Press thing. I find it a bit dated. And so it would be great if they could update it a little bit. I find that it is a bit more useful on the ABE side of the adult education house.
I'll agree with that.
And so I would tend to use it more on the ABE side, but it needs an update.
And
ABE is adult basic education. Sorry.
Yep.
That's for people who have English as a first language but do not read at a high enough level.
Okay, so I tutor non-literate refugee students, and I'm concerned that schools use standardized tests with my students. I feel the data is not useful because the students cannot comprehend the directions, let alone the questions. How do you feel about the emphasis on testing?
I think the emphasis on testing is stupid. Sorry. You may have hauled out a soapbox of mine. And, you know, when you give me a soapbox, I'm likely to crawl up on it. I think that overemphasizing testing is just the worst thing you can do with students of any kind, of any sort. I think it's a horrible decision. And so I only do testing when I'm absolutely forced to. There are so many other ways to assess how good your student is learning things than some fill out a paper test.
Okay. And
Is anybody unclear on my opinion on testing?
no, I think you have a lot of people in agreement with you.
It looks, based on all of the clapping and such, I think that people are on the same page with me. But yeah, not a fan.
No. All right. Which resource do you prefer to use for beginning ELL students?
So I am a big fan of Cambridge University Press's Venture series. They have a basic book that I use a lot that I think is quite good. But I have looked at some other basic series books. A lot of the publishers right now do seem to be trying to up their game on that level. And so I think that that we're starting to see better material at that lower level. I like the Venture series because its basic book actually has 2 workbooks. One for somebody who has the Latin alphabet but just doesn't speak a word of English, and one for those who do not have the Latin alphabet at all and are still working on developing that alphabet. And so by having that literacy level workbook at the basic level can be really helpful. So regardless of whether you're using Cambridge or not, which I'm not sponsored by Cambridge, which I should be with how many times I've referred people to them. But I think it's good for you to check for whatever supplementary materials come through at the basic level, and if it goes all the way down to the literacy level where they are working on understanding the Latin alphabet, if it goes that far down to the basics, then it's something that I would explore.
Okay. And someone asked, what about Burlington English?
I have not used it as much. Particularly, I haven't used it with the lower level students. I've used it more with kind of intermediate students and with some citizenship students, and they have found it useful. But I'm just not familiar with what they have at the lower end.
Okay. This is going to be the last question because we do have to wrap this up. The reading programs that were mentioned earlier are explicit and systematic phonics programs. Due to the current emphasis on science and reading, the science of reading, more traditional ESL methods are no longer used for students. What's your opinion?
Okay, wait. Well, I think there's something to be said for a multi-pronged approach to teaching everything. So anytime I hear somebody say, this is the only method that you'll ever need again, this will work for all situations, I'm like, I'm out. I think that some of the traditional stuff is very helpful. I think some of the new stuff is very helpful. I think some combination of the two is probably the best way to approach any situation. So looking at the tried and true stuff and then also exploring some of the new stuff. So
Great.
I do tend to be a fairly early adopter on new techniques if I see advantages to it. So I often do jump in. But I always have my feet lodged in that area of this is what I know will work.
Great. Okay, so That's it for today. Thank you so much, Stephen, for spending time with us today. And we hope
Absolutely.
everybody enjoyed this and attends a coaching session and
Yes,
fills
please
out
sign
the
up for coaching
survey.
sessions. I love coaching sessions. They're so much fun. Those of you who have been with us on coaching sessions, you know how much fun they are. Please sign up. I love to see you there.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.